Jesus is irrelevant. Perhaps not to everyone, but in all honesty, I have to say to most of us, even some of us who gather for Mass here this morning, Jesus has become irrelevant. For me, when I discovered this Jesus in a personal way, I could not read enough about him. I could not know enough about him. I read everything I could get my hands on. It was so exciting, really. I have to say, I'm still very much like that. But a long while back actually, one of my college professors introduced me to a priest named Father Karl Rahner, probably the greatest influence on the Second Vatican Council. I used to not like reading Karl Rahner because his sentences had more words in them than you could ever imagine, and it was always daunting for me to pay attention to 4 or 5 words, much less 37 in one sentence. But I do want to share with you 3 sentences that have stayed with me ever since, and actually I heard quoted in a book not too long ago. There are 3 sentences that go back to the 60s, and as you know, at this Mass especially, that the 60s were quite a restless time for us in society and in the church. Very restless, actually. And the 3 sentences were these. Christianity has not been given any guarantee by God that it will be unable to sleep through the present. Christianity can be old-fashioned. It can forget that the old truths and the values of yesterday can be defended only if and when one conquers a new future. And this is one of the longer ones. It has actually, to a great extent, fallen into this error already, so that today's Christianity often gives rise to the painful impression that it is running mopishly and in a disgusted, critical mood behind the carriage in which the human race drives into its new future. And that, in other words, Christianity is trying to catch up, barely even interested in catching up, really, with the movement of humanity. It has become so staid. In other words, if the church did not finally clear out its dusty old traditions, he was saying, and learn from modern society, it would fade into oblivion, and its stories that had given me at least so much life along the way would fade along with it. Someone once wrote, traditions are like lampposts. They light the way we are supposed to follow, but only drunkards hold on to them. A society that clings to tradition would still live in caves. It would stagnate, the traditions would. Yet a society that destroys the traditions destroys itself. Our traditions are important, immensely important, but they must continue on and be constantly clarified, constantly renewed, constantly deepened. What then of this irrelevant Jesus? Is he really? Is that really what it's come to? Why do so few have any sort of relationship with him anymore? Why does he seem to matter so little? How often do we even think about him on any given day, about him? What has come of our desire to know him more deeply? Does he any longer surprise us, stir us to action? The tradition is this, and let me be clear. The tradition says that Jesus is the final and the ultimate word spoken by God. The word in which God has spoken God's own self totally to us and without exception to anyone. We can only try to follow him. We can only try to learn from him. We can only attempt to listen to him, to let ourselves see him for what he is, for what he was. And I believe with all my heart this only happens in community, this seeing, this listening, this hearing, because the individual human being is so prone to illusion, self-deception, that it's only in relationship, really, that we can really hear this person. It happens within the church, within the gathering of God's people, in the midst of many sisters and brothers, that we will ever really understand him. But please know that the process, and I mean process, of understanding Jesus is not an easy one. The culture gets in the way. So do our preconceived notions of him from hearing these stories for so long and through so many people's agendas. If we are to ever understand him and thus ever even possibly be captivated by him again, it has to be ever because, and if he's ever to become relevant to us again, it has to be because we have had a personal encounter with him. We've had a personal experience of him. Somewhere along the way, we allowed that. We opened ourselves to this personal experience, this genuine encounter with him. And that's what happened on that mountain. Back with that core group of his disciples. That's what happened. They had an encounter they had never had before. They experienced something in him like never before. They got him. We are told that the inner core of his disciples experienced some presence in him that day. Something of the numinous, as we say. When people have this experience, they even use the word vision. They saw. But it's not really a seeing, it's more of an experience. That's just the word we use sometimes. I saw your goodness. Well, that really means I had an experience of your goodness. Something happened where this ordinary man became something extraordinary to them. Something happened. Was this a real moment? Did it really actually happen in time? This moment we now call the Transfiguration. Many scripture scholars would say that this is likely a metaphor and not memory. But that doesn't mean the story is not incredibly illuminating and important. They saw Jesus' body, his clothing suffused with light, filled with this radiant presence. There is a glowing with the radiance of the Spirit that is trying to be conveyed in this moment through them to us, because they don't know how else to talk about it. How do you paint a picture of light? How do I describe light to you in words? They only had their images to try to say what was happening, but what was happening was real. And that's the inner experience, this encounter between them and him. And the story continues, as you know. There appeared to them Elisha, well, one of them, and Moses. And in this moment, they're seen talking to him. Whether or not this actually happened does not take away its meaning. Its meaning is profound, because in that moment, these Jews, these good Jews, in that moment, it was clear here that they saw it all coming together. Everything they believed and worshiped and followed was coming together in this man's life. The whole past was there in their present. And Jesus was profoundly associated with these two great men of spirit in Israel's history. There was something so other about this this man that they saw in him. And the best analogy they could come with was light, radiance, illumination. It was occurring to them. And what they saw was so different, so stood in such stark contrast, really, to some of the negative perceptions of Jesus by his own family and by his opponents. Many thought this Jesus was out of his mind. Jesus' family thought he was insane and crazy. Some thought he was possessed by the devil. But even his opponents saw him as having some sort of spiritual power. Wow. And all agree that Jesus' presence was anything but normal. You and I are creatures drawn to the light, the splendor of the luminous. This was light. This was some sort of light they saw in him that they had never seen before. This was light made visible in flesh and blood, a combination of beauty and visibility, goodness and righteousness was all there in this moment of light. It left an impression on them, what they saw in him. There was something made visible in flesh here that no words could explain, but only images. They didn't have the words to say it, who this man had become for them. But who was he? Who was he for them? They would have never had words like talking about him as God and human. They could have never, ever begun to appreciate that profound doctrine of our church. Who is this man, though, who always made time to pray and looked so different when he was praying, when he was talking to his Father? Who is this man who cares about others more than he cared about himself and his own safety? Who is this man who experienced God so intimately that he chose a word to address God that children chose to address their daddies? Abba, a word that says, wow, relationality, familiarity, intimacy. Can I really have that with the source of everything that is, that sustains everything, including my own life, and will be there in the end? That reality can be so relational, familiar, and intimate to me. Abba, Daddy, can I talk to God like that? The God that the Jews held in almost too much awe and too much otherness and too much fear. God was such an intimate reality for this Jesus. And he experienced God as presence, this abiding presence, always there. Was it because his teaching was so enlightened? This was a new wisdom teaching. Jesus reflects a transformed way of seeing, very different from our conventional ways of seeing the world and life and each other. So much so that they began to see that the conventional ways of seeing were actually very blind. Whoa. It's like unlearning for the first time what you always assumed. It's probably happened to all of us. Where all of a sudden something we thought was true and good and right, ain't. Jesus' enlightened wisdom taught a way, a path, a narrow way that leads beyond some of the confining conventions of our day. Who is this man? They didn't know. Who is this man who saw so differently? Because he first saw so differently himself. It all happened because they had an experience, an encounter with him, and they listened to him. And so down through the ages, that's what the words they've left us with, you and I. Listen to him, please, listen to him, and you'll be led into all of the same. Illumination, wisdom, a new way of seeing everything that spells life. If we could just open ourselves to that possibility, my friends, to let ourselves have an experience of Him and encounter ourselves through listening to Him. If that is what happened to them there, then please be assured that is what can happen to me too. And it can happen to you too. It can. It can happen to any of us. If we just let ourselves have this personal encounter from listening to Him. Maybe it's time to listen again as if for the first time. If He is ever to be taken off the back shelf and put on the table again right in front of us. If we listen to Him, then through Him and with Him and in Him, we will discover a reality, a depth to life that we have never imagined. And we will find our way in this world. We will see like He saw. We ourselves will have a personal, intimate, relational experience of the Godhead. We will move through Him, with Him, and in Him into this radiance. And we will also know this constant presence to us in our day. We will hope and we will not despair. We will love. And we will love Him because we know Him. And in the end, we will become light, radiance for the people who know us. The truth is, as I stand here before you this morning on this February 21st, 2016, in the middle of America, Jesus of Nazareth is irrelevant. The truth also is, He doesn't have to be. The truth, for me at least, is He is not. The truth for me, He has never, ever been more relevant and more needed.